Discovery and survival. The Galactic Classification Index rated habitable worlds on a scale of A through X. Class A planets were paradise worlds. Perfect gravity, breathable atmosphere, moderate temperatures, and minimal dangerous fauna. Most species in the United Galactic Confederacy originated on worlds rated C through F. Humans came from a Class H world called Earth, a fact that already raised eyebrows among the Confederacy's older species. But it was the X-class planets, the Deathworlds, that fascinated xenobiologist Dr. Elena Reyes. 39 known Deathworlds in charted space, she murmured, scrolling through her data tablet. Her research vessel, the Curiosity, cruised silently through the void. 38 successfully mapped and studied, all except one. The blue-skinned Arcturian navigation officer, Zinra, looked up from her console. Because Terminus 9 has killed everyone who's tried to study it, including 3 human expeditions. Elena smiled thinly. Which is why we're not announcing our arrival. This wasn't an officially sanctioned mission. The Galactic Science Council had explicitly banned further exploration attempts of Terminus 9 after the loss of the last expedition 5 years ago. But Elena had secured private funding and assembled a small elite team willing to risk censure and their lives to map the last unexplored Deathworld. Approaching Terminus 9, announced the ship's eye, activating stealth systems and radiation shields. Through the view screen, Elena watched as the planet came into view. Unlike most Deathworlds, Terminus 9 appeared almost beautiful from orbit, swirling violet clouds over an azure surface with gleaming white polar caps. The beauty was deceptive. Those clouds contained sulfuric acid strong enough to dissolve standard environmental suits. The oceans were not water but ammonia-based liquids that would freeze human blood instantly. Gravity was 1.8 times Earth standard, and the native microorganisms were so aggressive they could consume synthetic materials. Begin surface scans, Elena ordered. The preliminary data flooded her screens. Electromagnetic storms raged across the northern hemisphere. Temperature extremes far beyond human tolerance. Atmospheric composition that would be lethal within minutes of exposure. Nothing we didn't expect, she said, more to herself than the crew. The question is, what did the previous expeditions miss? What they found 5 hours later, however, no one expected. Dr. Reyes called Kara Chen, their sensor specialist. You need to see this. Elena moved to Kara's station, where a false color topographical map displayed a small valley region near the planet's equator. That formation, Kara said, pointing to a series of regular geometric shapes clustered in the valley. Those aren't natural. Elena stared at the screen. Are you certain? 97% probability they're artificial structures, Kara replied. And based on the layout, they're human in design. A shocked silence fell over the bridge. That's impossible, Zinra said finally. The first human expedition was only 20 years ago, and none of them survived more than 3 days. Elena's mind raced. Unless there was an earlier mission that wasn't officially recorded, or, she hesitated, a colony ship that went missing. The Peregrine had vanished without a trace nearly 70 years ago. A passenger vessel carrying 300 colonists bound for Proxima Centauri. Search efforts found nothing. It was assumed lost to a hyperdrive malfunction in deep space. But what if? Prepare the lander, Elena announced. We're going down. Their descent through Terminus 9's atmosphere was violent. Even with the lander's advanced stabilization systems, they were tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. The acid clouds corroded their outer hull, alarms blaring as the integrity dropped to 60%, then 40%. We can't maintain this trajectory. Zinra shouted over the noise. The storms are too strong. Divert power from non-essential systems to the shields, Elena ordered, and aim for the valley with the structures. The lander plunged through the final cloud layer. Ground proximity warnings screamed as the autopilot fought to slow their descent. They hit the surface hard enough to throw everyone against their harnesses. For a moment, only the sound of emergency systems and heavy breathing filled the cabin. Then, with a groan of stressed metal, the lander settled. "Status report," Elena called out. "Hull integrity at 28%, replied the AI. "Environmental containment holding. External radiation and toxicity levels beyond tolerable parameters. Landing gear damage. Takeoff capabilities compromised." Elena exchanged glances with her team. They were stranded unless they could make repairs. "Suit up," she said. "We need to assess the damage and find those structures." Their environmental suits were cutting edge, designed specifically for Terminus 9's extreme conditions. Even so, they would only provide 6 hours of protection before the caustic atmosphere began breaking down the materials. They cycled through the airlock. The moment Elena's boots touched the surface, she felt the brutal gravity pulling at her body. The sky above was a roiling mass of violet, lightning crackling between cloud layers. The ground beneath her feet was hard, crystalline, and sharp-edged. And there, approximately 2 kilometers distant, were the structures. "Life signs?" Elena asked over the comm. "Nothing definitive," replied Kara, checking her scanner. "But there's some unusual electromagnetic activity coming from those buildings." They set out toward the structures, moving carefully across the treacherous terrain. Every step required exhausting effort against the high gravity. Within 20 minutes, Elena's muscles were screaming, despite her suit's exoskeletal assistance. They were halfway to their destination when the storm hit. It came without warning. A wall of dark purple clouds rolling over the ridge to their west, bringing winds strong enough to knock Sinra off her feet. Lightning struck so close that Elena's suit sensors temporarily overloaded. Acid rain began to fall, sizzling as it struck their suits. "Run," Elena shouted, helping Zinra up. "Head for the structures." They sprinted as best they could under the crushing gravity, watching in horror as their suit integrity readings began to drop precipitously. The acid was eating through the outer layers faster than anticipated. Elena's vision began to tunnel, her muscles burning with lactic acid buildup. Just as she thought she might collapse, they reached the first structure, a hemispherical dome constructed of local stone and what appeared to be salvage spacecraft material. "There's an airlock," Kara called out, pointing to a crude but recognizable entrance. They crowded around it. "No power, no way to cycle it open." "We have to force it," Elena said, pulling out her emergency cutting tool. "Our suits won't last another." The outer door slid open. The team froze, staring at the now open entrance. Someone, or something, had opened it from inside. "Hello," called a human voice from within. "You'd better come in quickly. The storm's getting worse." Stunned, they stepped through the airlock. The inner door opened to reveal a pressurized chamber, and standing before them was a woman, unmistakably human, perhaps in her 30s, with dark skin and eyes that regarded them with equal parts curiosity and wariness. Most shocking of all, she wore only simple clothing, no environmental protection whatsoever. "I'm Mara," the woman said. "Welcome to Haven Colony. You're the first visitors we've had in a very long time." Elena's team shed their deteriorating suits in the airlock's decontamination chamber. Tests confirmed the impossible. The air inside the settlement was not just breathable, it was nearly Earth standard. "How is this possible?" Elena asked, as Mara led them through corridors carved from the native stone and reinforced with salvaged metal. "The atmosphere outside is lethal." "To outsiders, yes," Mara acknowledged. "But we've adapted." The corridor opened into a vast central chamber. Elena stopped in her tracks, overwhelmed by what she saw. Hundreds of people moved about in what appeared to be a small, self-contained ecosystem. Hydroponic gardens flourished under artificial lighting. Children played in an open area. Machines hummed, processing something from collection tanks. "These are all descendants of the Peregrine crash survivors?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mara nodded. 73 years ago. Only 87 of the original 300 survived the crash. We've grown to nearly 400 now. But how? Elena gestured at everything around them. This environment should be impossible to maintain. And you've been outside, haven't you? Without protection. We can tolerate short exposures now, Mara explained. It's taken 3 generations of controlled adaptation. The symbiotes help. Symbiotes? Mara smiled. Come meet our council. They can explain better than I can. She led them to a chamber where 5 people sat in a rough semicircle. The eldest, a man with weathered skin and silver hair, stood to greet them. I am Isaiah, leader of Haven's Council, he said. We've been wondering when the Confederacy would find us again. Again? Elena asked. We sent out distress signals for 20 years after the crash, Isaiah explained. The 3 rescue attempts that came all failed. Their technology wasn't adapted to Terminus 9's conditions. Eventually, we stopped trying to leave and focused on surviving. Over the next hours, Elena and her team learned the incredible truth. The Peregrine survivors had initially sheltered in their crashed ship, expecting to die when their supplies ran out. Instead, their science officer discovered something extraordinary: microscopic organisms that could process Terminus 9's toxic atmosphere into breathable air. At first, they used the organisms in filtration systems, but as their equipment failed, desperation led to experimentation. They found that the organisms could survive within the human body, forming a symbiotic relationship that gradually allowed humans to process the toxic elements of Terminus 9. The first generation suffered, Isaiah admitted. Many died in the adaptation process, but those who survived passed the symbiotes to their children, who adapted more easily. Now, we are born with them. May I? Elena asked, holding up her medical scanner. Isaiah nodded. The scan revealed the truth: billions of microscopic organisms living in perfect harmony with his human cells, actively converting what should have been lethal compounds into usable forms. This is revolutionary, Elena whispered. The medical applications alone. We know, Mara said, but we also know how the Confederacy treats resources. We've been watching their ships pass by for decades. We decided long ago that if contact was ever reestablished, we would negotiate from a position of strength. What do you mean? Elena asked. Isaiah leaned forward. The symbiotes do more than help us survive here. They've extended our lifespans. They cure diseases. They allow us to communicate with Terminus 9 itself in ways you wouldn't understand. We are not just surviving on a Deathworld, Dr. Reyes. We have become part of it. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications. And now that we found you. Now, Isaiah said, you have a choice. You can leave, if we help repair your ship, and tell the Confederacy that Terminus 9 remains a deadly, uninhabitable world. Or you can stay, learn from us, and help us prepare to reveal ourselves to the galaxy on our own terms. Elena looked around at her team, then back to Isaiah. I think, she said slowly, that the galaxy is about to change forever. Revolution and recognition. 3 months after their crash landing on Terminus 9, Elena Reyes stood in Haven Colony's Central Dome, watching as a team of colonists and her crew worked together to expand the settlement's hydroponic gardens. The decision to stay had been unanimous among her team, even Zinra, who had initially been the most skeptical. The symbiotes have begun initial colonization, Dr. Sejit Kumar, Elena's medical officer, reported as he studied the cellular samples on his portable analyzer. Your body is accepting them remarkably well. Elena nodded, feeling the slight tingling sensation throughout her body that had become familiar over the past weeks. The colonists had been clear. Integration with the symbiotes was voluntary, but without it, they would remain dependent on the environmental systems of the settlement. How long until I can tolerate limited exposure? She asked. Another 2 weeks, based on your current adaptation rate, Sejit replied. You're progressing faster than average. Mara approached, carrying trays of seedlings. That's because she's not fighting it, she said with a knowing smile. The symbiotes respond to acceptance. Those who fear them have a harder transition. Elena had spent countless hours documenting everything about Haven Colony, their adaptation processes, their technology, their social structure. Everything about their existence defied conventional xenobiological understanding. The symbiotes weren't just allowing humans to survive on Terminus 9, they were facilitating the genuine coevolution. The repair work on your lander is nearly complete, Mara said, setting down her trays. Another week, perhaps less. Elena felt a pang of conflicting emotions. The repaired lander meant communication with the Curiosity would soon be reestablished. Decisions would need to be made. Have you thought more about Isaiah's proposal? Mara asked, reading her expression. I have, Elena said. And I think he's right. If the Confederacy learns about you without preparation, they'll swoop in with their regulations and restrictions. They'll claim jurisdiction over Terminus 9 and treat you as an anomaly to be studied, not a sovereign community. And your career? Your standing in the scientific community? Elena laughed softly. I was already risking that by coming here unauthorized. What's a little more risk when weighed against making first contact with a new form of human civilization? The ground trembled beneath them, a common occurrence on Terminus 9, with its unstable tectonic activity. But this tremor continued longer than usual, growing in intensity. That's not normal, Mara said, her expression shifting to concern. An alarm sounded throughout the settlement. Isaiah's voice came over the communication system. Orbital alert. Multiple vessels entering atmosphere. Defense positions. Elena and Mara exchanged alarmed glances before rushing to the command center. There, Isaiah stood before a salvaged sensor array, his expression grim. 3 Confederate science vessels and 1 military escort, he reported. They're heading directly for us. How? Elena asked. The Curiosity shouldn't have reported back without hearing from us first. Your ship's AI might have had override protocols, Zinra suggested, joining them, if it detected our lander's power signature reactivating. Elena cursed under her breath. We need to contact them before they do something rash. Too late, Isaiah said, pointing to the display. They've deployed atmospheric insertion craft, heavily armed, based on their energy signatures. Let me talk to them, Elena insisted. They know me. If they see a familiar face. Agreed. Isaiah nodded. But we'll be prepared for less diplomatic outcomes. Elena stood at the settlement's main airlock, dressed in a light protective suit, the most she needed now with her partial symbiotic adaptation. Through the external cameras, she watched as 3 Confederate vessels landed in formation around their own damaged lander. Troops in heavy environmental suits deployed first, establishing a perimeter. They moved with the practiced precision of special operations forces, weapons at the ready. Following them came figures in scientific environmental suits, distinguished by their blue coloration. Elena recognized the lead scientist immediately. Dr. Vero Kill, her former mentor, and the head of the Confederacy's Xenobiological Division. The man who had explicitly denied her request to explore Terminus 9. She activated the external communication system. This is Dr. Elena Reyes. Hold your position and lower your weapons. This settlement is inhabited by peaceful human colonists. Through the camera feed, she saw Vero stop in his tracks, his helmeted head tilted upward toward the settlement sensors. Elena. His voice crackled through the speaker. Is that really you? Our scans showed human life signs, but in an impossible environment. We feared some kind of trap or hallucination effect. No trap, Vero. But you need to understand the situation before coming closer. These people have been here for 70 years. They've adapted to Terminus 9 in ways our science hasn't conceived of. There was a pause. We detected your lander being repaired. Why didn't you contact the Curiosity? It's complicated. I need you to come alone with minimal protection, as a show of good faith. Another, longer pause. Elena could almost hear the debate happening among the Confederate team. Very well, Vero finally replied. Myself and 2 guards. Unarmed. Vero's reaction to Haven Colony mirrored Elena's own initial shock. He moved through the central dome in stunned silence, his environmental suit looking absurdly bulky among the simply dressed colonists. Impossible, he murmured, staring at the medical data Elena presented. These symbiotic organisms should have consumed their hosts, not integrated with them. Your understanding of biology is limited by Confederacy parameters, Isaiah said. Life finds ways to adapt that your science hasn't imagined. Vero removed his helmet, a gesture of both trust and scientific curiosity. The air quality readings, they're well within human tolerance. The symbiotes convert the toxic elements, Elena explained. They've engineered this entire ecosystem. And you've begun this integration process yourself. Vero asked her, noticing the subtle changes in her complexion, the slightly bluish undertone that all adapted humans developed. I have, as has my entire team. Vero shook his head in amazement. The Confederacy Council will want to establish a permanent research station. There will be questions of jurisdiction, of course, but given that these people are human descendants, that's not going to happen, Isaiah interrupted firmly. Haven is independent. We've survived without Confederate assistance for 70 years. We will determine our own relationship with the wider galaxy. Vero blinked, unused to being contradicted. With respect, under Confederate law, all human settlements fall under laws written without knowledge of our existence. Isaiah cut in. We are not merely human anymore, Dr. Kell. We are human terminus symbionts. A new species by your own classification standards. Tension filled the room. Vero's guards shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps, Elena suggested diplomatically, we should discuss what Haven Colony is willing to share, rather than what the Confederacy wishes to take. The negotiations lasted for days. Confederate reinforcements arrived in orbit, but Isaiah remained steadfast. Haven Colony would share its knowledge of symbiotic adaptation only under specific conditions. Recognition as a sovereign entity, control over who could visit Terminus 9, and substantial compensation for any medical applications developed from their unique biology. On the 4th day, the Confederacy's High Commissioner arrived personally. Commissioner Terran Vex was a towering Centaurian, his 4 arms moving in the complex patterns that denoted his species' emotional states. His arrival in the settlement caused a stir. Most of Haven's residents had never seen a non-human before. This situation is unprecedented, Vex announced after reviewing all the data. A human colony surviving on an X-class world, developing symbiotic relationships with native organisms, evolving into something new. Not unprecedented, Elena corrected, just previously undiscovered. It raises questions about how many other impossible environments might harbor life, or be capable of supporting it with the right adaptations. Vex's upper arms made a gesture of concession. The scientific implications are profound, certainly, but the political ones are equally complex. They needn't be, Isaiah said. Haven wishes to join the galactic community, but on our terms. We have much to offer. Knowledge of environmental adaptation that could transform colonial efforts throughout the galaxy. Medical symbiotes that could revolutionize treatment of numerous diseases. But we will not be studied like specimens or treated as a resource to be exploited. Commissioner Vex was silent for a long moment, his arms making subtle movements as he considered. Finally, he spoke. I am authorized to offer provisional sovereign status to Haven Colony, pending full council review. In exchange, we request that a small scientific delegation be permitted to remain and collaborate with your people, under your supervision and regulations. Isaiah looked to the other council members, who nodded their agreement. Acceptable, he said, with one additional condition. Dr. Rice will serve as the official liaison between Haven and the Confederacy. Elena looked up in surprise. Me? You bridged our worlds, Mara explained. You chose to understand rather than exploit. There is no one better suited. Commissioner Vex's arms formed the pattern indicating formal agreement. The Confederacy accepts these terms. 1 year later, Elena stood on the surface of Terminus 9, breathing the toxic air easily, feeling the symbiotes within her body processing the harmful elements. Behind her stretched Haven colony, now expanded with new domes and research facilities. Before her stood a delegation of scientists from 12 different species, all wearing environmental suits of varying designs. "Welcome to Terminus 9, she announced. "What you are about to experience will challenge everything you believe about environmental adaptation and interspecies symbiosis." The delegates murmured among themselves as the airlock to the main facility opened. From it emerged Isaiah and several other fully adapted humans, wearing only light clothing despite the caustic atmosphere. "These are not special suits," Elena continued. "What you're seeing is the result of human symbiote integration. Over the next month, those of you who wish to may begin the adaptation process yourselves. The symbiotes are now being modified to work with non-human physiologies as well." A Valerian scientist raised a manipulator appendage. "The reports claim these symbiotes have medical applications beyond environmental adaptation." "They do," Elena confirmed. "The Haven Medical Cooperative has already developed treatments for 17 previously incurable conditions. The first shipments of medical symbiotes are being distributed to Confederate hospitals as we speak." "And the rumors about extended lifespans?" asked another delegate. "Not rumors," Isaiah said, stepping forward. "I am 112 years old, though I appear much younger by human standards. The symbiotes repair cellular damage at rates previously thought impossible." The implications weren't lost on the assembled scientists. Extended lifespans, environmental adaptation, revolutionary medicine, all from a world that had been classified as uninhabitable. "The galaxy stands at a crossroads," Elena continued. "For too long, we've approached hostile environments as obstacles to be conquered with technology alone. The Haven approach demonstrates a different path. Adaptation and cooperation with indigenous life forms." As if on cue, the ground beneath them rumbled. Once, such a tremor would have sent visitors scrambling for safety. Now they watched in amazement as Isaiah closed his eyes briefly, seeming to communicate with the planet itself. "A minor tectonic shift," he reported. "Nothing concerning. You can sense the planet's activities." A Meridian geologist asked incredulously. "The symbiotes connect us to Terminus 9's biosphere," Isaiah explained. "We feel its rhythms, understand its patterns. We don't just survive here. We are becoming part of it, and it part of us." As the delegation moved toward the settlement, Elena remained behind for a moment, looking up at the violet sky. In the year since first contact, everything had changed. The Confederacy had reclassified all Deathworlds for reassessment. Research into symbiotic integration had become the fastest-growing scientific field, and Haven Colony had transformed from an isolated settlement into the most sought-after research posting in the galaxy. Most importantly, the definition of habitable had been forever altered. Worlds previously deemed impossible were now seen as challenges awaiting the right adaptive approach. Human colonies were already implementing early-stage symbiote programs on 3 other hostile planets. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Mara asked, joining her outside. Elena smiled, just appreciating how much has changed. The last unexplored Deathworld wasn't just mapped, it changed everything. "As all great discoveries should," Mara replied. "This is just the beginning. Wait until the galaxy sees what comes next." Above them, a new Confederate science vessel broke through the clouded layer, bringing another delegation of eager researchers. The once feared Terminus 9, the last unmapped Deathworld, had become the center of a scientific revolution that would echo across the stars for generations to come. It was proof that sometimes the most hostile environments harbored the greatest opportunities, if one was willing to adapt rather than conquer.